My name is Lauren Reed. I'm 35, a single mother, and until recently, I was also the silent financier of my parents' quiet, comfortable life. I never thought that a seemingly innocent Tuesday afternoon would rip open every scar from my past and force me to make the hardest decision I've ever made, all because of what I heard the moment I walked through my parents' front door. I wasn't supposed to be there yet. My meeting ended earlier than planned, so I thought I'd surprise my daughter Ava by picking her up a bit sooner. She loved our little drives home from Grandma and Grandpa's. I parked in the same spot I always did, smiled as I stepped onto the porch and pushed the door open without knocking like I had 100 times before. What I heard made my stomach twist. "Do it right, you little idiot!" a man's voice snapped. It was my father. His voice had always had a cutting edge, but this was sharper. "Ava." My feet froze, my ears strained. "Scrub that pan, like you mean it. Don't just stand there like a useless doll." I couldn't move at first. My mind didn't want to believe what it was hearing. But the sound of the metal clattering in the sink and a small trembling voice whispering, "I'm sorry," pulled me down the hallway like a magnet. When I turned the corner into the kitchen, my heart broke clean in half. Ava, my sweet 6-year-old daughter, stood on a shaky wooden stool at the sink, her small hands red from hot water, her curls matted to her forehead with sweat. She was scrubbing a pan nearly half her size, while my father towered over her like a judge passing a sentence. "You think the world's going to wait for your excuses?" he barked. "When your mother was your age, she already knew how to clean a kitchen properly." My mother sat at the table sipping her tea. Her face didn't twitch. Her voice didn't rise. Just silence. Cold, complicit silence. And then there were the giggles. 2 sets of legs dangled from chairs, my nieces Emma and Haley, Kim's kids, watching, smirking, whispering to each other. "She can't even clean a pot," Emma said with a snort. "She's just like her loser dad," Haley chimed in. "That's why he left." My blood turned to ice. Grandpa said that, Emma added with a shrug. I felt like I'd been thrown back 25 years watching history play out with horrifying accuracy. I was Ava, except now I was also her mother. And no way in hell was I going to let her live the life I did. "Put that pan down, Ava," I said, stepping fully into the kitchen. All 5 heads turned. My mom gasped softly. My father's expression hardened into something between shame and arrogance. "Lauren," he said stiffly, "you weren't supposed to be here yet." Ava dropped the sponge, turned, and ran toward me, wrapping her soaked arms around my legs. I could feel her tiny body trembling. "Mommy." I rested a hand on her head, breathing in the smell of dish soap and fear. "What the hell is going on in here?" I asked calmly, too calmly. My father stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Teaching her some goddamn responsibility. Clearly you're not doing it." "Responsibility," I echoed. "By berating her, by forcing her to clean dishes she can't even lift." My mother stood. "The girls all help around the house." "Really?" I cut her off, glancing at Emma and Haley still buried in their tablets. "Where's their dishwashing station?" "Don't start with your drama," Lauren, Kim's voice floated from the living room. "The girls did their chores earlier." "Did they? Or is Ava just the only one expected to earn her keep here?" The silence that followed was the answer I already knew. I crouched down to Ava's level and lifted her chin. "You don't ever have to do something that makes you feel bad about yourself again, okay?" I whispered. A tear slid down her cheek. "He said I was dumb, like Daddy." That was it. That was the exact moment I knew this wasn't about a single incident. This was a pattern, a generational wound repeating itself in my child. And I would burn down the entire system before I let it destroy her the way it almost destroyed me. Growing up, I learned early on that love in my family came with conditions, quiet ones, unspoken but impossible to miss. My sister Kimberly was the sun we all had to orbit around. She was praised for breathing, adored for simply existing. I, on the other hand, was the default, the afterthought, the one whose achievements were measured against hers and always fell short. I still remember my 7th birthday. Kimberly had gotten a bike with pink tassels and a shiny bell 2 weeks earlier for no reason at all. I, on my birthday, received a set of hand-me-down puzzles missing half the pieces and a cake that looked store-bought and forgotten. "We have to be practical," my mom said. But practicality never seemed to apply when Kimberly was involved. My father, Mark, was a retired police officer with a temper that never quite stayed retired. My mother, Joanne, worked part-time at a florist shop and full-time at nodding along to my father's outbursts. Discipline in our house looked more like power plays. Fairness wasn't even a concept. They said I was the strong one, the independent one, the child who could fend for herself. But all that meant was the one we can neglect without guilt. So I did what strong girls do. I buried the hurt and channeled it into something useful. I studied like my life depended on it, graduated top of my class, got a scholarship to Northwestern, and left my hometown without a single backward glance. While Kimberly flunked out of 2 community colleges and eventually married a guy who sold used boats for a living, I was climbing the corporate ladder in Chicago, building a life on my own terms. But old wounds don't stay buried. They wait. And eventually, they find a new place to resurface. When I got pregnant with Ava, everything in my world shifted. Her father, Jake, seemed like a solid man at first. Steady job, kind smile, the kind of man who kissed your forehead in the morning just because. But when Ava turned 3, he left. Not for war. Not for work. For his secretary. Just like that, I was alone. A toddler, a full-time job, and no local support system. So when my parents offered to watch Ava 2 days a week while I worked late, I hesitated. But I said yes. I wanted Ava to know her grandparents. I wanted to believe they had changed. I thought foolishly that maybe they'd treat her better than they treated me. I was wrong. At first it seemed harmless. Ava came home a little quiet. I chalked it up to tiredness. Then she started asking things like, "Why does Grandma say I talk too much? And why does Grandpa call me messy?" But I brushed it off. I told myself she was sensitive, that kids misunderstood things all the time. I wanted to believe the best of my parents so badly I ignored the worst of them. Then came the mortgage. 4 years ago, they were about to lose their house. My dad had made some questionable investment decisions, and they were 3 months behind. I stepped in like a good daughter. "Just until we get back on our feet," they said. I set up automatic transfers, $2,500 a month. 4 years, not once did they offer to resume it. Not once did they say thank you. And I never told Kimberly, because I knew what would happen. She'd either demand her share or mock me for being so desperate to buy affection. Maybe both, but I wasn't doing it for affection. At least, that's what I told myself. Looking back now, I realize I was doing what I always did, earning love the only way I knew how, through sacrifice. Through silence. Through swallowing every ounce of resentment in hopes of one day being seen. But the moment I saw Ava on that stool washing dishes with shaking hands and tear-stained cheeks, I understood with devastating clarity. I wasn't just repeating the cycle, I was passing it on. I had become the bridge between 2 generations of emotional neglect. And in that instant, I decided the bridge ends with me. After that day, something inside me wouldn't go back to sleep. I couldn't stop seeing Ava's hands red from hot water trembling. I couldn't unhear my father's words or the smug way Haley said, "That's why her dad left." It haunted me every time I closed my eyes. Even more painful was Ava's silence. She didn't cry, didn't complain, she just got quieter. And that silence screamed louder than any tantrum ever could. I tried to talk to her gently the way a mother does when she doesn't want to scare her child out of opening up. One night after bath time, she finally looked at me and asked Mom, "Do I have to be really good? So Grandpa will like me?" That question wrecked me, because I remembered asking myself the same thing, at 8 years old. After I'd made straight A's and still got ignored at the dinner table while Kimberly got praised for spelling Wednesday correctly. And now my daughter, my bright, funny, beautiful Ava, was carrying that same invisible weight. I knew I had to make some serious changes. Not just words, not just warnings. real, irreversible change. The first thing I did was sit at my laptop and open my online banking account. The mortgage payment had already auto-deducted earlier that morning. $2,500 gone again. It showed a history of 48 consecutive payments. $120,000 for what? For emotional damage to my child. I clicked cancel recurring payment. The system asked, "Are you sure?" And for the first time in my life when it came to my parents, yes, I was sure. Then I called my financial advisor, Ben, and had him reroute that same amount into Ava's college fund. Every dollar that used to hold up their house would now build her future. And Ben, I added at the end, can we set up a trust fund for her? Something they can't access under any circumstance. He paused. Lauren, are you okay? No, I admitted. But I will be. That night, I turned off my phone, poured a glass of wine, and sat in silence. The kind of silence that isn't heavy but freeing. Ava was asleep. The dishwasher hummed gently. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. But peace doesn't come without backlash. The next morning, I had 7 missed calls, 5 from my mother, 2 from my father, and a string of texts ranging from confused to enraged. Lauren, the bank says the payment didn't go through. Did something happen? Are you playing some kind of game? This is unacceptable. You can't just cut us off. Your mother is sick with worry. Call us. I didn't reply, not yet. Instead, I went to work and tried to focus. But during lunch, my phone buzzed again, this time with a name I didn't expect, Kimberly. Mom and Dad told me what you did. Seriously. You just stopped paying. Because of one little argument, you're punishing them over a dishwashing tantrum. Ava needs to toughen up. The world isn't going to cuddle her like you do. I read those words over and over, my hands shaking. Kimberly never understood. She never had to. She was the cuddled one. That evening, after Ava was asleep, I responded with only one message. My finances are none of your business. And if your daughters ever bully Ava again, we're done completely. Not financially. Personally. She didn't reply. Later that week, my bank called to flag a suspicious login attempt to my personal account. My father had tried to access it, claiming he had authorization. He didn't. I changed every password, added 2-factor authentication, and locked everything down tighter than a vault. The message was clear. I was no longer the daughter who gave everything and asked for nothing. I was no longer their safety net. I was Ava's. And I had finally chosen the right side. You'd think the hardest part would be cutting off the money. It wasn't. The hardest part was unlearning the belief that I owed them everything. That belief had been sewn into me since childhood. It was in every "after all we've done for you," every sigh from my mother when I said no, every glare from my father when I dared to question him. That belief turned love into a transaction, and I'd been paying it like a debt my whole life. But Ava changed everything. In the days after I cut off the mortgage payments, I made an appointment with Ava's pediatrician. I needed more than just my instincts. I needed professional insight. After a long conversation, the doctor gently recommended a child therapist. She's showing signs of anxiety, she said carefully. She flinches when you raise your voice even slightly. She apologizes for things most kids wouldn't notice. These can be early indicators of emotional stress. So I booked the session. And in that softly lit room with shelves full of toys and gentle music humming in the background, my daughter began to unpack what I had buried for decades. With her small voice and big eyes, Ava talked about Grandpa yelling too loud and Grandma saying I eat too much. She said her cousins got cookies while she had to be helpful. That sometimes when she didn't clean fast enough, her grandpa would say, "You're just like your mother, lazy and dramatic." My breath caught in my throat. I had heard those words too, but now they were aimed at a 6-year-old. Dr. Hayden, the therapist, was calm but firm. What you're describing is emotional mistreatment. And while Ava is still very young, if this pattern continues, it could impact her self-esteem for years to come. I swallowed hard. What do I do? You've already done the first right thing removing her from that environment, she said. Now maintain the distance. And reinforce in Ava that her value has nothing to do with how well she performs. When we got home that night, I tucked Ava into bed like I always did, but this time I lingered a little longer. Hey, I whispered, brushing her hair back. Nothing that happened at Grandma and Grandpa's was your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. You hear me? She nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering in her eyes. Even if you mess up, even if you forget your chores, even if you spill something, Mommy still loves you exactly the same. She reached out and held my hand. Do I have to be perfect? No, baby, I said, my voice thick. You just have to be you. That night I cried in the dark. Not because I was sad, but because I had finally found the courage to be the mother I never had. The following week, my parents escalated. They called my office. This is Joanne Reed, I heard through the speakerphone as my assistant looked at me wide-eyed. Lauren's mother. I need to speak to her immediately. It's urgent. I nodded for the call to go through. Mom, I said, my tone cold and professional. What's the emergency? My blood pressure's through the roof, she snapped. The stress from your little mortgage stunt could kill me. Is that what you want? No, I replied evenly. But if it's a medical emergency, you should call 911, not your daughter. I hung up. 2 days later, my father left a voicemail that sounded more like a threat than a plea. Lauren, this is your father. You need to stop this. We raised you. We gave you a roof over your head for 18 years. You have responsibilities. Fix this. Or there will be consequences. Consequences. He still thought he could scare me into submission. But the difference now, I wasn't a scared little girl anymore. I was a mother. And my loyalty was no longer to the people who raised me, but to the child I was raising to be free of them. It was a Saturday morning when I realized just how deep the manipulation went, not just toward me, but toward anyone who might try to pull me back into their web. My Aunt Valerie, my mother's sister, called out of the blue. We weren't close. She lived upstate in Rochester, and we rarely spoke outside of obligatory holiday texts. But her voice that morning was filled with concern. Lauren, honey, she began, your mom called me. She's really upset. She said you've cut them off and won't let them see Ava anymore. She says it's all a misunderstanding. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Here it was, the guilt campaign, mobilizing the extended family. I explained everything to Aunt Valerie, from the shouting in the kitchen, to the therapist's concerns, to Ava's stories of doing chores while her cousins played video games. There was a pause. A long one. I believe you, she said finally. I saw the way your parents treated you growing up. I didn't know it had gotten this bad. Tears stung my eyes. I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone from that side of the family to simply acknowledge the truth. I should have spoken up when you were younger, she added. There were times I tried, but your mom always shut me out. Hearing her say it, hearing someone say yes, I saw what they did was like lancing a wound I didn't know I'd still been carrying. I felt a strange combination of grief and relief. Then came the bombshell. You know, Aunt Valerie continued, your parents got a sizable inheritance from your grandfather when he passed. It should have been enough to retire comfortably. But they blew through it in under 5 years. I was stunned. I had no idea. Oh, they never told you, she said bitterly. They've always expected someone else to catch them when they fall. First your grandfather, then your sister, until she married Greg and couldn't afford to help. Then it was you. That inheritance could have set them up for life, but they spent it and then turned to me, framing it as a short-term emergency. They hadn't just fallen on hard times. They had planned on leaning on someone, on leaning on me. After that call, I sat alone in the kitchen and looked around. At the fridge with Ava's school artwork at the backpack hanging by the door, at the half-built Lego tower on the rug. And I said it out loud to myself for the first time. They never loved me unconditionally. They loved what I could provide. This wasn't just about favoritism. It wasn't just about childhood wounds. It was about financial control disguised as family loyalty. They had built their retirement plan around me and didn't even have the decency to treat my daughter with kindness in return. A week after canceling the payments, the formal foreclosure notice was delivered to their mailbox. I knew because the next day I got a group email from my father, CC'd to half the family. The subject line read, "Our daughter has abandoned us." The email painted me as a cold, bitter child who had cut off her aging parents in their time of need because of a small disciplinary moment involving her spoiled daughter. It was manipulative, dramatic, and filled with half-truths designed to incite pity. But it backfired. By the end of the day, I had 6 private messages from cousins and extended relatives, most of whom I hadn't spoken to in years, saying they supported me. That they remembered how my parents had always treated Kimberly better. That they'd seen how I was treated like the help even at family gatherings. One even wrote, "Honestly, good for you. It's about time someone told them no." That night, after Ava's bedtime story, I tucked her in with extra care. She was already starting to sleep more soundly, laugh more freely. The shadows under her eyes were fading. "Mommy?" she asked sleepily. "Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me?" I brushed her hair back from her forehead and whispered, "No, sweetheart. They're just learning that how they treated you wasn't okay." She nodded thoughtfully. "Like a timeout." I smiled. Exactly. Sometimes even grown-ups need a timeout. By the time a full month had passed, my parents' financial situation had gone from denial to crisis mode. I knew the foreclosure clock was ticking, and so did they. But instead of self-reflection, they doubled down on desperation. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the call came. "Lauren," my father said, his tone subdued for the first time in, maybe ever. "We need to talk. In person." I didn't answer right away. I stared out the window of my apartment, watching Ava and our neighbor's golden retriever chase bubbles in the yard below. Her laugh floated up to the second story like sunlight. "I'm willing to meet," I said finally, "but only with a therapist present. A neutral third party. That's my only condition." He hesitated. I could hear it in the air between us. "Then fine. Whatever you want." I booked a session with Dr. Hayden, Ava's therapist, who also worked with families. We scheduled for the following week. I hired a sitter for Ava. I didn't want her anywhere near what I suspected would be an emotionally volatile storm. My parents arrived right on time. That alone was a miracle. But they didn't look like themselves. My father's blazer hung looser than usual. My mother's signature blowout was replaced with a hastily tied bun. If their appearance was meant to signal humility, I wasn't biting. Dr. Hayden opened the session by setting the tone. "We're here to talk openly but respectfully. Everyone will have a chance to speak uninterrupted. Lauren, would you like to start?" I nodded, taking a steadying breath. "I'm here because what happened at your house last month wasn't a one-time incident," I began. "It was a symptom of a bigger pattern, a pattern I grew up in, and that I now see being repeated with Ava." My mother opened her mouth, but Dr. Hayden raised her hand. "Please let Lauren finish." I continued. "I've heard Ava's stories. I've seen her fear. And I refuse to allow her to believe, like I did, that love must be earned through perfection or servitude." There was a pause. A long one. Then my father leaned forward, his voice sharp again. "We didn't abuse her. You're blowing this out of proportion. She needs discipline. You're raising a soft child." "She's 6, I said, biting back emotion. 6 years old. And calling her useless because she couldn't scrub a pot isn't discipline, it's humiliation." My mother jumped in, her voice shrill. "We did our best. We raised you. We gave you food, shelter. You gave Kimberly praise," I snapped. "You gave me conditions. You gave me a ledger to balance. And when you needed money, who stepped up?" That shut them both up. Dr. Hayden leaned forward. "From my experience, children rarely fabricate patterns of emotional mistreatment. If Ava consistently reports feeling devalued and compared to her cousins, there's likely a foundation for those feelings." My father huffed. "So what, you're just going to keep her away from us?" I met his gaze. "If there's no change, yes." He scoffed. "So what do you want? For us to grovel? For us to beg?" I took another breath. "No, I want 4 things." I listed them out. Therapy, ongoing, no excuses. Acknowledgement that Ava and I were treated unfairly. Respect for my boundaries, my parenting, and my daughter. Limited contact supervised only until real progress is shown. My father looked ready to explode, but my mother surprised me. If that's what it takes to see Ava again, we'll do it. Dr. Hayden nodded. Good, that's a start. As for the mortgage, I added that support is over. Permanently. I won't be financing disrespect. My father scowled. So we're just on our own now? Yes, I said, like I've been my entire life. The meeting ended without hugs, without smiles, but it ended with something far more important. A boundary. And for the first time in our tangled family history, I didn't walk away feeling small. I walked away feeling powerful. It took 2 more weeks before I got the call I'd been expecting. We're putting the house on the market, my mother said flatly. No emotion, no warmth, just a statement of reality. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I simply said, I think that's a wise decision. They'd finally accepted the truth they couldn't afford their lifestyle without me. And now, for the first time in their adult lives, they were going to have to support themselves. They found a modest condo 20 minutes away, listed the house, and moved out quietly. No grand announcement, no family gathering. The same home I had grown up in, where every wall had echoed with comparison and withheld affection, was now someone else's mortgage to worry about. I thought that would be the end of it. But life has a strange way of surprising you, especially when healing starts happening where you least expect it. It was Ava who noticed the difference first. She stopped flinching when I raised my voice, even when I wasn't angry. She began trying new things again, like rollerblading in the driveway or reading out loud without hesitation. She stopped apologizing for everything, even little things like spilling juice or forgetting her lunchbox. At school, her teacher emailed me, Ava has really blossomed these past few weeks. She's answering questions confidently and raising her hand. Whatever you're doing at home, it's working. It was the most affirming thing I'd read in months. Meanwhile, my parents reluctantly at first attended their therapy sessions. Every week they met with Dr. Hayden on their own. I didn't ask what they discussed. I didn't care so long as the work was being done. Eventually, they requested a short supervised visit with Ava. Neutral ground, public place, clear rules. Dr. Hayden and I agreed it was time to test the waters. We met at a nearby park on a sunny Sunday morning. I packed Ava's favorite snacks, a blanket, and a few picture books. I was nervous, but she was calm. Curious, even. They arrived on time, dressed casually, no gifts in hand. My father looked stiff, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. My mother smiled, unsure but hopeful. To my surprise, Ava didn't retreat. She waved, sat on the blanket, pulled out a book, and held it up. Grandma, want to read with me? Joanne blinked, then nodded. I'd love to. It wasn't perfect. My dad barely spoke unless spoken to, and there were a few awkward silences. But there was no scolding, no condescension, no favoritism. When Ava tripped while running after a butterfly and got grass on her leggings, my father stood up abruptly. My breath caught. But instead of yelling, he knelt beside her and asked, You okay, kiddo? She nodded. He handed her a tissue. I used to trip all the time at your age, he said. Grass stains are a rite of passage. She smiled. That smile stayed with me for the rest of the day. Afterward, Ava climbed into the back seat and said, That was nice. Nice. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, we continued with carefully supervised visits, mostly at parks or libraries. Always brief, always structured. But slowly, something changed. My parents began listening, not just to Ava, but to me. They stopped defending themselves at every turn. My mother even sent a text after one visit that read, Thank you for letting us try again. We know we're learning. It was short, but it was honest. Then came something I didn't expect. Kimberly reached out. We met for coffee, neutral ground, just like with my parents. I didn't realize how much they relied on you, she admitted, stirring her latte. They never asked me to help. Never even told me you were paying their mortgage. I shrugged. They didn't want you to know. Maybe they thought I wouldn't say no. Kim looked away for a moment. I used to think I had it worse because they expected so much from you, but now I wonder if I was just sheltered. Like, not really prepared for anything. That hit harder than I expected. Maybe for the first time we weren't competing. We were reflecting. Maybe this wasn't just about healing my daughter's childhood. Maybe it was about reclaiming my own. The most unexpected change didn't come from my parents. It came from Kimberly. After our coffee talk, she sent me a message a few days later. Do you think I'm doing the same thing to my girls, favoring Emma over Haley? It took me a moment to respond. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I didn't want to weaponize honesty. But I chose truth with care. I think you learned what we both did. That love looks like attention. And attention was always earned by being impressive. She read the message and didn't respond right away. A week later, she invited me and Ava to a group play date at a children's museum. Emma and Haley would be there. I almost declined. But something told me to go, not for the past, but for the future. We arrived early. Ava held my hand tighter than usual as we walked through the big glass doors. The museum was bright and busy, full of the kind of noise that makes kids feel safe. Laughter, squeals, the occasional crash of building blocks. When Kimberly and the girls arrived, I braced myself. Old dynamics have a way of creeping back in without warning, but this time was different. Emma walked up to Ava with a smile and said, "Wanna build the tallest tower in the world with me?" Ava blinked. Okay. I watched them sit side by side, stacking foam bricks higher and higher. At one point, Haley tried to knock it over something she would have done just for a laugh a few months ago. "Don't," Kimberly said quickly. "Let them build it." Haley looked surprised. "But it's gonna fall anyway." "And that's okay," Kimberly replied. "Let them enjoy it while it lasts." That moment hit me in the chest harder than any insult my parents had ever thrown at me. They were learning. We all were. A few days later, I received another text from Kimberly. "I've signed Emma and Haley up for family therapy. Just wanted you to know." I stared at that message longer than I cared to admit. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a crack in the armor, a first step. And sometimes that's all you need to start building something real. Meanwhile, Ava kept flourishing. At school, her teacher told me she had volunteered to lead a group project. "She's stepping into herself," Ms. Carter said. "She's not afraid of being wrong anymore." At home, she laughed more deep belly laughs that took over her whole body. The kind of laugh I don't think I ever had as a child. One afternoon, she dropped a glass of juice in the kitchen. It shattered. She froze. Her eyes flicked to me, bracing. And I did the one thing I wish someone had done for me all those years ago. I smiled. "Oops," I said. "Want to help clean it up?" She nodded slowly, the fear melting away. That evening, we had dinner at our apartment. Just the two of us. Ava told me about her class pet, a turtle named Pickle, and how she got to feed him lettuce that day. "I think Pickle's shy," she said thoughtfully. "But I talk to him and he pokes his head out a little more every day." I nearly laughed at the metaphor. "Sounds like he's lucky to have you." Later that week, my mother called. Not to demand, not to guilt trip. To ask, "Would you and Ava be open to a park visit this weekend? We'll bring a book, not candy. I know you prefer that." It was small, but it was respectful. And for us, small and respectful was massive progress. That weekend, we met at the same park where we'd had our first supervised visit. This time, Ava brought a kite. My father held the string while she ran in circles, laughing. When the kite nose-dived into the grass, he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he said, "That's okay, kiddo. The wind's a tricky beast." And Ava laughed harder. That laugh carried something in it. Not just joy, but safety. The kind of safety I'd been fighting to build for her from the moment she was born. The kind I'd never known but was finally learning how to give. A few months after that park visit, something happened that I never thought possible. My parents apologized to Ava. It wasn't a grand ceremony. There were no tears, no dramatic background music. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning in the reading nook of our local library. Ava was curled up on a beanbag with a book about sea creatures, completely immersed. My mother sat beside her, flipping through a gardening magazine but clearly not reading it. My father hovered nearby, awkward as ever. Then my mother lowered the magazine and said, "Ava, sweetie, can I tell you something?" Ava looked up curious. "I'm sorry," she said, "for how we made you feel when you were younger. I wasn't kind. I didn't speak up when I should have. And that wasn't right." My breath hitched. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't dare interrupt the moment. Ava blinked slowly, unsure of what to say. She nodded once, then went back to her book. It was enough. Later, as we walked to the parking lot, my father cleared his throat. "I shouldn't have called her useless," he muttered, eyes fixed on the ground. "No child should hear that. I'm trying to do better." That was the closest to a full apology he'd ever given anyone. And in his own stiff, gruff way, I think he meant it. I didn't throw my arms around him. I didn't cry. I just nodded and said, "Thank you for saying that." Progress, I've learned, rarely feels like a mountaintop. More often, it's a string of tiny steps that, when you look back, form a mountain you didn't even realize you were climbing. And we were climbing slowly, deliberately together. A few weeks after that, Ava dropped her ice cream cone during one of our park visits. She looked at my father wide-eyed, clearly expecting the worst. I held my breath. He knelt down beside her. Happens to the best of us," he said with a soft smile. "Come on, let's get you another one." She nodded, and something shifted in her expression. Her shoulders relaxed. The fear I'd seen in her eyes so many times before was gone. Later, my father pulled me aside while Ava played with a kite. "I saw it," he said quietly. "The look in her eyes when that cone hit the ground. She was scared of me, Lauren." His voice broke. "I never want to see that again." "Neither do I thought. But I didn't say it aloud. I didn't need to. There are words you don't have to speak when your entire body has become a declaration." In the months that followed, visits became easier. Still supervised. Still structured. But no longer tense. Ava even started asking when she'd see Grandma and Grandpa again, not because she feared them, but because she was beginning to trust them. Trust. That word felt almost mythical in the early days of this journey. But here it was, gently building itself in the space we had carved out between firm boundaries and reluctant redemption. Even Kimberly continued to change. She started standing up for Ava when Emma or Haley crossed the line. She corrected passive-aggressive remarks. She asked questions about what therapy could look like for their family. "I always thought therapy was for people who were broken," she said during one of our walks. "Now I see it's for people who want to be better." I nodded. "It's like a tune-up for your soul." We weren't best friends. Probably never would be. But we were no longer enemies locked in a silent war for approval. We were two women trying to do better by our daughters than had been done for us. And that was more than enough. As the year progressed, Ava's light only grew brighter. Her teachers called her a leader. Her art was full of bold colors and joyful shapes. She laughed, she played, and most importantly, she felt safe. That was the miracle I'd been chasing all along. Not perfection, not revenge. Just peace. And it was beginning to feel real. By the time Ava turned 7, we had built something I once thought impossible, a version of family that felt safe. For her birthday, she didn't ask for a big party or a trip to the zoo. She just wanted to have her grandparents, her cousins, and a few school friends over for cupcakes and games at our apartment. It was small, it was simple, and it was deeply significant. My parents arrived on time carrying a gift bag with a children's science kit Ava had been eyeing at the bookstore. No massive toys, no overcompensating, just something thoughtful and appropriate. Kimberly brought Emma and Haley, and for the first time, there was no mocking, no superiority. The girls actually played together, equal participants in a scavenger hunt Ava and I had designed around the apartment. But the most powerful moment came later that afternoon. The kids were eating cupcakes, faces sticky with frosting, when Ava accidentally knocked over a glass of juice. It splashed across the table onto the floor, soaking through a pile of napkins. The room froze. I froze, because I knew exactly what that moment used to look like. Raised voices, accusations, shame disguised as discipline. But this time, my father Mark stood up, grabbed a dish towel, and said gently, It's just juice. You're okay. Ava stared at him. Her lip quivered. And then she smiled. He cleaned it up without a word of complaint. No sighs, no eye rolls, just a nod and a quiet. Next time, maybe hold the cup with both hands. Yeah, it was ordinary, which made it extraordinary. Later that evening, after everyone had left and the dishes were done, Ava climbed onto the couch beside me holding a leftover cupcake in her hand. "Mommy," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Is it okay that I love Grandma and Grandpa again, even though they used to be mean?" I didn't answer right away. How do you explain forgiveness to a 7-year-old? How do you teach her to hold her boundaries and still keep her heart open? So I tried this. "Yes, sweetheart. It's okay. People can do wrong things and still try to change. What matters is that they're trying, and that you know you never ever have to earn love." She nodded thoughtfully. "They're learning. Like I'm learning my times tables. It's hard, but they're trying." I smiled through the sting in my eyes. "That's very wise," I told her. "And I'm really proud of you." Later that night, after I tucked her in and kissed her forehead, I poured a glass of water and sat on the balcony watching the city lights blink like stars in motion. I thought about that little girl I used to be, the one who walked on eggshells, who tried to be enough, who stayed quiet when she should have screamed. I thought about the woman I've become, one who still feels fear, still questions herself, but no longer sacrifices her peace for approval. And I thought about Ava. She would grow up knowing what safety felt like, what love without strings looked like, what it meant to be enough just as she was. This was the legacy I wanted to pass on. Not a house, not an inheritance, but healing. And for the first time in my life, I believed that was more than enough. One afternoon, a few weeks after Ava's birthday, I found myself sitting across from Kimberly at a small coffee shop near the Riverwalk. It wasn't a planned meeting, more of a last-minute text from her that said, "Got time to talk." She looked different that day. Not in the way she dressed or wore her hair, but in her demeanor. Something in her posture had softened, like she was no longer trying so hard to uphold some image. After a few minutes of catching up kids' schoolwork, she cleared her throat and said, "You know, I used to think you were just jealous." I blinked. "Of what?" "Of me," she shrugged. "Of how Mom and Dad treated me. Of the attention." I raised an eyebrow. "You're not wrong." I was. But not for the reasons I thought. She continued, looking down at her coffee. "I thought I had it worse because of the pressure. But I see now. I wasn't expected to be capable. I was just coddled. You were the one carrying everything." That silence between us wasn't awkward, it was honest. The kind of quiet that allows space for reflection, not blame. "I guess we both got different flavors of screwed up," I said, half laughing. She nodded, smirking. "Yeah. Yours came with guilt. Mine came with ignorance." It was the first time I felt like we were speaking to each other as equals, not as rivals in an invisible contest for love, not as the golden child and the ghost child. Just two women trying to do better than what we were given. She sipped her drink, then asked, "Do you ever wonder what things would have been like if they'd just treated us the same?" "All the time," I said. But maybe she said this way, we get to make sure our kids never have to ask that question. That hit me hard, because that's what it was all about, wasn't it? Breaking the chain, not for revenge, not to make our parents pay, but to make sure the next link, the next generation was forged in love, not imbalance. A few days later, Kimberly invited us over for dinner. Just her family and mine. No parents, no drama. The girls played board games after dinner. I watched from the living room as Ava hesitated to take a turn during Scrabble, her finger hovering over a tile. Emma surprisingly gently nudged her. "That's a good word. Put it down." "Even if I spelled it wrong?" Ava asked. "You tried. That counts." Kimberly caught my eye from across the room. We both smiled. It wasn't perfect. Ava still sometimes needed reassurance. I still caught myself bracing when my mother spoke too loudly or when my father frowned too long. But things were different now, because we were different. We were choosing day by day to live outside the roles we'd been assigned. My parents were still attending therapy, slow progress but steady. My mother had joined a local book club and was reading books on emotional parenting. My father, surprisingly, had taken a part-time job giving historical walking tours around the city. He's pretty good at it, Kimberly told me once. All those years of lecturing finally paying off. That made me laugh harder than it should have. Even Ava noticed the shift. Grandpa doesn't yell anymore, she told me one evening after a short visit. He listens now. Yeah, I asked, brushing her hair. She nodded. He still makes the grumpy face. But then he says, sorry. Grumpy face, I'd take that. Because it meant we weren't just healing, we were watching others try to heal too. And that, in its own messy, imperfect way, felt like redemption. It wasn't long before the changes we'd worked so hard for started to ripple outward quietly, but undeniably. At first they showed up in the smallest of ways. Ava stopped second-guessing herself before speaking in class. She stopped apologizing for things that weren't her fault, like dropping her pencil or asking a question twice. Her teacher, Ms. Carter, sent another note home. Ava is becoming one of the most confident students in the room. She encourages other kids. She even volunteered to lead a group discussion last week. I kept that note in my wallet. But the real shift, the one that moved me in a way I hadn't expected, came during a family therapy session. Dr. Hayden suggested an exercise. Each person, she said, would take a turn, expressing what they needed from the others to feel loved, respected, and safe. It was a vulnerable ask, and the room grew silent for a moment. Kimberly went first. I need honesty, even when it's hard to hear. Then it was my turn. I need my parenting decisions to be respected, especially in front of Ava. Undermining me in front of her makes me feel erased. My mother followed, surprisingly willing. I need time to unlearn a lot of old habits. My father paused, then mumbled, I need to not feel like a villain every time I show up. Fair enough. Then it was Ava's turn. She looked at all of us with those wide hazel eyes, the same ones she used to keep lowered in shame, and said, I need everyone to remember that I'm still learning. And it's okay if I make mistakes. You could have heard a pin drop. There it was. The whole truth packaged in the wisdom of a 7-year-old. She didn't need perfection. She needed permission to grow. Dr. Hayden smiled. That's a beautiful reminder for all of us, Ava. Later that evening, after Ava had gone to bed, I found myself thinking about what she'd said. Her words weren't just about her, they were about all of us. My parents learning to be different kinds of grandparents. Kimberly trying to rewrite her own parenting style. Me breaking cycles I hadn't even realized I was still tangled in. That weekend, Ava and her cousins had a play date at a local kids' gym. The place was filled with obstacle courses, foam pits, and bouncy mats. Pure chaos and pure joy. At one point, Ava hesitated at the top of a climbing wall. Emma was already on the other side waving. Haley, impatient, called out, Come on, Ava. Don't be scared. Before I could step in, Kimberly gently put a hand on Haley's shoulder. Hey, let's cheer her on instead. Okay? Haley blinked, then nodded. You got this, Ava. And Ava smiled. She climbed the wall. Watching from the sidelines, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: pride. Not just in Ava, but in all of us. We were unlearning. We were becoming. After the playdate, as we buckled into the car, Ava turned to me and asked, Was I brave? I looked at her, really looked at her, this little girl who had weathered storms no child should ever face, and still came out smiling. You were incredible, I said. Not because you weren't scared, but because you climbed anyway. She nodded thoughtfully, then added, You're brave too, Mommy. I don't think she knew how much that meant. In that moment, I realized something profound. It wasn't just Ava who was being raised differently, it was me too. I was being raised into the kind of parent, sister, and daughter I never thought I had the strength to be. And for the first time, I felt like we weren't just surviving, we were thriving. 6 months had passed since I first walked into that kitchen and found Ava crying over dishes too big for her hands. Half a year. And in that time, we hadn't just patched cracks, we had torn down old walls and started building something new, brick by brick. One afternoon I received a call from my mother. Her voice, once sharp and layered with guilt-tripping tones, was soft, hesitant. "We were wondering," she said, "if we could come over. Just to visit. No agenda. No gifts. Just see how Ava's doing." I paused. "Just the two of you?" "Yes." "Okay," I said. "But only if Ava agrees." She did. So the following Saturday, my parents came by for a brief afternoon visit. Ava was finishing a jigsaw puzzle on the coffee table when they walked in. My father stepped over, cautiously crouched beside her, and studied the puzzle for a moment. "You're missing the corner piece," he said. "I know," Ava replied. "I think it's under the couch." Without a word, he got on his knees and reached beneath the sofa until his hand emerged with the missing piece. He handed it to her and smiled, not a tight, performative smile, but a quiet one, the kind that says, "I'm trying." She placed the final piece and turned to him. "Thanks, Grandpa." He nodded, visibly relieved. Later, we all had tea around the kitchen table. My mother commented on how much taller Ava had gotten, how confident she seemed now. "She's changed," she said. "No," I corrected gently. "She's just finally safe enough to be who she's always been." That made my mother go quiet. Eventually, the conversation turned to practical things: school projects, summer camps, books Ava had been reading. No tension, no condescension, just normalcy. When they left, Ava hugged both of them. And then came something I'll never forget. As my father turned to leave, he looked me square in the eye and said, "Thank you for not giving up on us." I nodded. "Thank you for finally listening." Because that's all I ever wanted, really. Not obedience, not control. Just the dignity of being heard. A few days later, Ava and I went for a walk after dinner. The sky was tinged with purples and golds, and her hand was warm in mine. "Mommy," she said, "do you remember when Grandpa used to yell a lot?" "I do." "He doesn't anymore." "No," I said, "he's learning." She smiled and skipped ahead, arms spread like airplane wings. Watching her, I realized something so simple yet so profound. Healing doesn't always look like fireworks or huge breakthroughs. Sometimes it's in the quietest places: a puzzle piece under the couch, a soft apology, a skipped heartbeat that turns into laughter. We didn't erase the past. We couldn't. But we stopped repeating it. And maybe that's enough. Later that night, Ava asked to write in her big girl journal before bed. She called it her feelings notebook. I watched from the doorway as she scribbled in her uneven handwriting, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you writing about?" I asked gently. She looked up, beaming. "That I'm not scared at Grandma and Grandpa's anymore, and that you helped make it better." I swallowed hard. "You helped too," I said. "More than you know." Because sometimes the bravest people in the room are only 3.5 feet tall, and they carry generations on their tiny shoulders. But not anymore. Not on my watch. Spring arrived with a sense of renewal we hadn't felt in years. The air smelled like lilacs and possibility, and for once, there wasn't a storm brewing behind every family conversation. I found myself enjoying things I used to dread, like brunch with my parents or weekend board games with Kimberly's family. We still had boundaries, of course. Visits were scheduled. Expectations were clear, and anything even close to the old patterns was addressed immediately. But the difference now, everyone understood why those boundaries existed, and more importantly, no one questioned them. Kimberly was making real progress too. She started letting Emma and Haley express themselves without the constant pressure to be perfect. She listened more. She apologized more. And slowly, I saw her become the mother she once resented me for trying to be. I didn't realize how loud our house was, she admitted over lunch one day. Not in noise, but in pressure. I thought I was preparing them for life. Turns out, I was just passing down the stress. I nodded. It's what we knew. But not what we have to keep doing, she added. Exactly. Ava continued to thrive. Her teacher called again, this time to rave about her storytelling project. She wrote a fictional piece about a turtle who used to hide in his shell, but eventually learned to trust the world. Ms. Carter laughed. Sound familiar? It did. That night, I read the story myself. It was about a turtle named Finley who used to get yelled at for being slow, who was scared to come out of his shell, who thought he had to be faster, better, perfect. But then he met a wise old owl who told him, "The world isn't safer when you hide. It's safer when you know someone's watching over you." The owl in the story was clearly me. I cried reading the last line. Finley didn't have to change to be loved. He just had to be himself and be safe enough to believe that was okay. Ava had learned the very thing I'd spent decades trying to unlearn. And somehow, that made every painful step in this journey worth it. Then came an unexpected phone call, this time from my dad. "We're thinking of hosting a family cookout," he said, voice almost sheepish, small. "Just the girls and you and Kim's family. We'd like to try." I hesitated. Not because I didn't believe in the change, but because the part of me that still bore old scars whispered, "Are you sure it's safe?" But I looked at Ava twirling in the living room to some pop song, Happy Grounded Whole, and I realized something. I wasn't making decisions from fear anymore. I was making them from strength. So I said yes. The cookout was simple: burgers, lemonade, a backyard sprinkler, and laughter that came more easily than it had in years. At one point, Ava tripped over the garden hose and skinned her knee. She looked around nervously, bracing for scolding. My father, who had once shouted over a dropped milk glass, knelt beside her. "Hey," he said softly, "that's what knees are for. Let's get you a Band-Aid." No yelling, no comparison, just care. Later, as twilight painted the sky in soft purples, I sat beside Kimberly on the porch steps. "You think this is real?" she asked. I looked at our kids playing together. I listened to the sound of my father's chuckle as he tried to explain TikTok to Haley. I watched my mother compliment Ava's homemade lemonade. "Yes," I said. "I think this is what real finally looks like." Because real isn't perfect. Real is effort. Real is accountability. Real is choosing over and over to be better, even when it's hard, even when you used to get it wrong. That night after we got home and Ava curled into bed, she asked, "Do you think people can really change, Mommy?" I tucked the blanket around her and kissed her forehead. "I think they can," I said. "Especially when they have a reason to." She smiled. "Like me." I smiled back. "Exactly like you." Because Ava wasn't just my reason. She was the revolution. The final test came on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. Ava had been selected to read a short poem during her school's spring assembly. She was nervous, pacing the kitchen, chewing her nails, reciting the lines under her breath. "What if I mess up?" she asked me, voice barely above a whisper. "Then you'll take a deep breath and keep going," I told her. "Messing up doesn't make you less brave. It just makes you human." She nodded but still looked uncertain. To my surprise, both my parents had asked to come to the assembly. I hesitated before saying yes. Public setting, controlled time frame. If things went sideways, Ava would have support. We sat in the third row. My father wore a collared shirt and khakis, his trying outfit. My mother clutched a tote bag with a notebook and pen, always the pseudo-librarian. When Ava's name was called, she walked to the front of the gymnasium with a nervous smile. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper. Then she began. Her voice was clear and soft like morning light. The poem was about strength, quiet strength. The kind that lives in people who've been underestimated, overlooked, and still kept showing up. There was a line that made my throat tighten. "Even if they said I couldn't shine, I learned to glow from within." That line wasn't just poetry, it was history rewritten. Midway through the second stanza, she stumbled on a word, resilience, but paused, sounded it out, and carried on. The room applauded when she finished. But the most important sound came not from the crowd, but from my father. He stood. First, clapped, first. It wasn't performative, it wasn't obligatory. It was pride. Real, unfiltered pride for a girl he once called useless, now shining unapologetically before a full auditorium. Ava saw him. She saw all of us, and her eyes lit up. Afterward, as the crowd filed out, my mother knelt beside her. "That was beautiful, honey. You were so brave." Ava beamed. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "You used to make me feel small. But not anymore. My mother's eyes filled. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. No excuses, no deflection, just that. And for a moment I believed forgiveness might actually be possible, not because we forgot what happened, but because we finally stopped pretending it didn't. That evening, Ava and I curled up on the couch, still in our dress-clothes shoes, kicked off popcorn bowl between us. You know what I liked best? She asked, licking salt off her fingers. When Grandpa clapped first. I smiled. Yeah, that was a pretty great moment. Do you think he's different now? I thought about it. He's trying, I said. And trying matters. Ava leaned against my arm. Trying is how you get better. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because she was right. Trying is how we heal. How we rebuild. How we rewrite the story we were handed and hand something better to the next chapter. As the credits rolled on the movie we half-watched, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind that disappears at the first raised voice, but the kind that settles into your bones. The kind that comes from doing the hard thing, standing your ground, and choosing love without losing yourself. Ava had given me the courage to draw the line. And because of that, our story changed. Not perfectly, not magically, but beautifully. One moment at a time. A year ago, I stood in my parents' kitchen and saw my daughter shrink under the weight of words that had once crushed me. Back then, I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if drawing that line would isolate me forever, or if standing up for Ava would tear my family apart. But what I've learned is some things need to be torn down before they can be rebuilt. Breaking the cycle wasn't easy. It cost relationships comfort, certainty. But what I gained was worth far more: peace, clarity, and a kind of love that doesn't ask to be earned. Boundaries, I've discovered, aren't walls to keep people out. They're bridges that only the willing can cross. They filter love from obligation. And in the end, they saved not just my daughter but all of us. My parents are still learning. Kimberly still stumbles. I still carry old fears that whisper what if. But Ava is growing in a home where love doesn't require performance, where apologies are real, where mistakes don't mean exile, and where truth is welcomed even when it's hard. We didn't rewrite history, but we rewrote the future. If you're reading this and you've ever felt trapped by the past, know this: it's okay to say no. It's okay to walk away from what hurts, even if it's called family. And it's more than okay to protect the ones you love, even when the cost is high. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing every single day not to repeat what once broke you. And that choice, that's where freedom begins.